عسلامة عسلامة ومرحبا بكم الناس الكل. دونك اليوم احتفلنا معاكم في أول نهار اللي هو في الاحتفال متاعنا IWD 2021. دونك ليفينمون هذا عملناه سبيسيالمون ليكم انتوما باش نحتفلوا مع بعضنا باليوم العالمي للمرأة. دونك مع بعضنا منستير وباجع وكرتاج. دونك حبينا اليوم بقدرة ربي نعمل معاكم ديتوكس اللي فيهم برشا موتيفاسيون، فيهم برشا حاجات سبيسيال اللي باش يشجعونا وباش يعلمونا برشا هذه التكنيك en fait. دونك هذاك علاش the first talk will be with Kelsie. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, how are you, Kelsie?
Good, how are you?
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Thank you so much for being here with us to celebrate this wonderful event.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes.
So, hello everyone. Like she said, I'm Kelsie, and I'm very, very excited to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much for having me be a part of this amazing event. Today we're going to be talking about how we can all find our voices and embrace, leverage, and build our personal strengths in order to build our community of women in tech as a whole. So let's start by talking about a research study that happened in July 2020. This nonprofit organization known as Catalyst conducted research surrounding the impact that COVID-19 had on gender equity in the workplace. Obviously, this year has been anything but normal, and we've all been challenged in many ways that we've never experienced before. And one of these ways has been that most people have not been in an office for a very, very long time. This has definitely had impact on everyone, but it has had profound impact on women in particular. In this study, Catalyst found a couple jarring facts that I want to share with you. The first is that 45% of women surveyed, and this was about 1,000 women who they surveyed in this study from around the world, they found it more challenging to speak up in virtual meetings than they did in-person meetings. So this means that as a whole, women are really struggling to speak up and have their voices heard in this virtual setting compared to what they were able to feel comfortable with in an office setting. And this means that women are not having their ideas conveyed as much as we should be during this work from home period. This is already extended for quite a long time. We don't know how much longer it will go on for, but it's really important that we can figure out how to have our voices heard during this time. Another thing they found through this study is that 1 in 5 women surveyed felt either ignored or overlooked by colleagues during video calls. This is really another difficulty that women are facing, because if we feel ignored or overlooked, it will make us even less likely to share our thoughts in the future as we're in those meetings. And that will only increase that percentage we saw in the last slide of how many women don't feel like their voices can be heard in the workplace. Additionally, 3 in 5 women who were surveyed felt that working from home had negatively impacted their promotion prospects at work. So essentially, this means that these women are feeling like this work from home period really was a detriment to their career growth. And in a time where we want to see more gender equity in the workplace and we want to see more women leaders stepping up and taking charge in some of these companies, this is something that is very upsetting, because it means that this growth has been halted in a way because of the pandemic. So these are just some of the ways that we've really seen a shift during this time. However, unfortunately, this narrative that we're seeing with women not feeling heard, feeling overlooked, and not seeing this growth potential is nothing new. In fact, for years, I've been hearing how, I'm going to have a difficult time when I graduate and go into the workplace because it will be challenging to speak my mind and not think that people will think of me as bossy or controlling or any of those negative adjectives we're often told as women, just because me speaking up could make other people think that I am those things. So let's look back to another study from 2015 to see how this has been in place for quite a few years and not just from the pandemic. So in 2015, a psychologist named Adam Grant performed a study surrounding why using our voice in particular can be risky for women. So this idea of voice that he defined was essentially stepping up to say that there needs to be change in the workplace, or proposing ideas that could really positively impact the future of any type of workplace, not just tech, but the working world as a whole. And he's basically trying to figure out, is there a risk that is more heightened for women in doing so than for men? He conducted this study with about 100 employees from the healthcare industry, and they were both male and female. There are a couple other jarring facts that came from this study that might resonate closely to what we just heard from the last. First of all, male employees received significantly higher performance evaluations than women when contributing the exact same idea. So he had women and men propose the same exact solution to managers. The managers were not aware of the study that was happening. And then after they all proposed their ideas, he spoke with the managers and asked them to rate the women and the men on a scale of 1 to 10 on how effective they believed the performance of the individual was in proposing these solutions. Unfortunately, in every single case, the male employees were ranked higher than the women employees, even though it was the same idea. So essentially that shows us that sometimes, even though we can use our voice to say the exact same thing as our colleagues are saying, we're not recognized in the same positive way. Another outcome of this study was that managers described male employees as more helpful than women when speaking up equivalent amounts. So in meetings, the person running this study would tell all the subjects of the study to speak out for a certain number of times or a certain length of time. And then upon the conclusion of the meeting, he would go back to the managers and ask who they thought were the most helpful in the meeting. And again, every single time the male employees' names came up, the female employees' names did not come up. So again, we're just not being recognized for those contributions we're making, even though they're exactly the same as all of the people working around us. Finally, he conducted a study where he had write-ups of 2 CEOs. One was male and one was female. They had the exact same credentials, the exact same biography, and the exact same rating of how frequently they spoke in meetings. So they were either described as talking more than average or talking less than average in meetings. He had people read through these and then rank the CEOs on effectiveness. So essentially what came out of this is that even though male and female CEOs on the paper were described as speaking the exact same amount, either above average or below average, the male CEOs were ranked far more positively than the female CEOs were when it came to speaking more than average. The people reading the studies thought that male CEOs speaking more than average was completely okay, but when female CEOs did the same, they were ranked negatively, saying that the female CEOs were either bossy or controlling or speaking too much and not letting their employees be heard. So again, we just see this incredible disconnect between how women are perceived in the workplace. That's what I want to talk to us about today, because this narrative has been here for far too long, and it's time that we can take control of it and can change it together. But in order to do this, we need to not be scared of finding our voices and using them, but we need to instead take control of our voices and learn how to share them with the world in a positive way so that we can really shift this perception of women in the workplace and start taking those leadership roles in stride and having people recognize us for the contributions we're making. So let's find our voices together. After all that intro, I'd like to introduce myself a bit. So hi, I'm Kelsie McElroy. I work for Google as a software engineer on an ads team. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the United States. And my journey to Google is I interned 3 times through my university experience. I graduated from Penn State University in Pennsylvania in 2020, so last May. And then I started working at Google full-time this past August. So I've been here for about 7 months now, which is really exciting. And a fun fact about me, because you always need a fun fact, is that I am a certified DJ. I don't actually really have talent with this, but I did take a class once, so I can say that I'm certified, and it makes a good fun fact. This is a picture of me, my very first day at Google, my very first internship, almost 4 years ago now. I might look confident to you, but I can tell you that internally I very much was not. I was very much struggling to find my own voice. Even though I'd received an offer from my dream company for my dream job, I didn't feel like I belonged. I was questioning why I was hired in the first place, and a lot of that stemmed from the negativity that other people were projecting onto me and that narrative that we've already talked about that we see so frequently. So for example, when I received the offer, my university decided to publish something about it so that the entire campus could see it, which was a little scary to me because I don't love being the center of attention in that way. But all of a sudden I had people coming up to me in my classes and my colleagues telling me I was only hired because I was a woman, or I was a diversity hire, or they didn't understand why I was hired over them because they were much more qualified for the job. And all of these negative thoughts really got inside of my head and started shifting the way that I saw my voice and my ability to speak up for myself and convey that confidence that I'd previously held in getting this job. That's an example of how this can happen in real life to any of us. I had been achieving the same types of scores on exams and performing the same as my colleagues and peers in my classes, but because I was a woman, they diminished my achievements by saying, "Oh, you're just a diversity hire." And this, unfortunately, was not just something that happened to me. It happened to a lot of my friends who also received jobs at Google and were women or underrepresented groups. So this has happened to me, and this is why I want to talk to you about this, because I had to go through the process of finding my voice, and I think it made all the difference in the world for me. So when I said that I felt very much out of place in this job and was questioning why they hired me, it was because of something known as imposter syndrome, which a lot of you may have heard, but in case you have not, it's defined as the feeling that you are not qualified for your success and will someday be discovered as a fraud. This is something that a lot of people face, no matter what industry you're in. It's something that is very, very common across Google. I've talked to managers and people who are much higher up in the company than me, and they still feel this way. I didn't know this is what I was facing at the time when I was first hired, but as people started talking about it a bit more, I realized, yeah, those are pretty much the exact feelings that I have. Questioning why I belong, questioning why I was hired, and having those other voices get inside my head and convince me that I didn't deserve it myself. So I think it's important that we, before learning how to find our voice, can understand imposter syndrome a bit. So first, I want to talk about the facts of imposter syndrome, because there are a lot of facts and myths that go along with it, and it's important we understand the difference. So the first is that 70 to 80% of people have reported this feeling at some point in their career. This was honestly pretty shocking to me because, like I said, when I felt imposter syndrome, I didn't think that anyone else was feeling it. I thought it was just me because I was the fraud and everyone else deserved what they had gotten in their life through success or whatever it may be. So when I saw that pretty much the majority of people are feeling this way, it did make me feel more validated in those feelings. The second is that everyone can experience it, as far as every group of people can experience it, but it is more prominent in women, minoritized people, young professionals, and university students. And the common thread here is essentially that we are in some type of minority group in our field. This is particularly for the technology field. And as you can see, I am in 3 of these groups. I'm a woman, I'm a young professional, and I'm a university student. So definitely made sense that I had imposter syndrome at the time, but this is just another thing that women and underrepresented groups have to face that some of our colleagues might not have to face. And it doesn't mean that us experiencing these feelings are indicating there's anything wrong with us. It's just sometimes, unfortunately, in the nature of who we are and the fields that we are in, that we're facing this more than other people may be. The last fact is that imposter syndrome is very representative of the high-achieving individual. So if you are feeling this way, you're in good company. It means that you are striving for greatness and have a lot of success in your future. But people who are high achievers often put a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect. And so when they're feeling like they're not perfect or feeling like people around them are doing more than them or gaining more success, they can often start to internalize those feelings and turn to these questions of imposter syndrome and feeling like they don't belong. So now that we understand the facts, let's go through some of the myths, which are probably more important to understand if you're feeling this way, because these are the things that can really help you get over that feeling. So the first is the thought that I am the only person who feels this way. As we saw before, this is simply not true. 70 to 80% of people feel this way. But when you are experiencing that questioning in yourself, it can be very easy to go through this self-destructive thought process of thinking that you're the only one who feels this way because you're the only one who doesn't belong. Just know that that's not the case. And even if people aren't talking about it, they're probably feeling the same way too. The second is, if I can do it, anybody can. This is a very common thought that people with imposter syndrome will face. I have done this myself, where if I figure something out at work, I, instead of celebrating that success for myself, will just think, oh, well, someone else probably could have figured that out much sooner than I did, or, well, everyone else I'm working with could have done the same thing, so it's really not that great that I solved it. No, everything that you're doing is great. Everything that you figure out is a wonderful success in your life, and you should celebrate it. Doesn't matter if other people can do it too. It's still something that you've accomplished, and you should give yourself credit for that. But at the same token, it doesn't mean that everyone else can do it if you can. For example, there's definitely bound to be something that you are very talented at that other people are not as familiar with, just as there are things that other people will be the experts at that you aren't as familiar with. That's what makes a company and a working environment really productive. And not everyone brings the same thing to the table. We can all bring different things to the table and then collaborate amongst those things to make it efficient and effective among all of us working together. The last myth is the thought that my success is just fooling everyone. It's only a matter of time before I'm found out. This is the common thread of imposter syndrome, this idea that you are a fraud or you are in some way not deserving of what you have and you're going to be discovered. This, unfortunately, is something that I still deal with a lot, to be honest. Some days when I'm struggling with something at work, I'll wake up in the morning and my first thought is, I really hope that today is not the day people figure out that I'm not as good at coding as they think, or I'm not as good as this one particular topic as they think I am. Whatever it may be, that's still something that runs through my mind, and it's something that runs through a lot of people's mind. And that's really at the core of what we need to shift when we're going through imposter syndrome so that we can work to get over this. So I want to do a quick self-assessment. Obviously, no one has to answer this out loud or in the chat or whatever it may be, but just for yourself, I want to go through some questions that helped me figure out that I did have imposter syndrome when I didn't know what it was and didn't know that I was facing it. So the first is, do you assume that your success is the result of luck? So are you thinking that any success you've been given, rather than being the result of hard work and dedication, is just because you somehow got lucky? This is something that I faced when I got hired at Google the first time for my internship. After people started telling me that I was just a diversity hire, I thought maybe I was just a diversity hire. Maybe I just got lucky and was in the right place at the right time, instead of thinking, no, I really worked for this. I spent years making sure I was studying the right things that I needed to. I was engaging in STEM outreach that was important to them, and I really worked hard and deserved it. So if you're feeling this way, it might be a sign you have imposter syndrome. The second question is, do you constantly worry about being outed as a fraud? Again, this is the common thread of what imposter syndrome is. So if you ever have those thoughts like I do, where you think you're going to be discovered or found out that you did just get lucky and don't belong there, this could be another sign. The third is, do you believe that all of your peers are more qualified than you? So I actually am in a situation where I do believe this quite often, because the people surrounding me have PhDs for the most part, and I only have a bachelor's degree. So it can be very easy to feel like my peers are all more qualified than me, because on terms of education alone, they are. But that doesn't mean that they're more qualified for that specific job than me necessarily, because I can still bring things to the table that they might not be able to. So this could be another sign that you're facing this imposter syndrome feeling. But it doesn't mean that you are necessarily less qualified than anyone else. You still have the same job and you still got to the same place that they did. The next is, do you fear that any mistake in your work will end your career? This goes along with being a high achiever. Like I said before, it can be very easy if you are a perfectionist and always want to strive for success, that any small mistake you make or any correction you're given can really shift your whole mentality about yourself. This, again, is something that I face. If I get negative feedback from someone or constructive feedback from someone, I can sometimes interpret that as I made a huge mistake, that people are going to think less of me, or they're not going to think I'm as qualified, when instead they're just trying to help grow my career even further. So this is another case where we need to kind of shift that mentality, if we're thinking this way, into more thinking, this isn't a mistake that's going to end my career. It's just an opportunity for me to learn and actually grow my career instead. And the last question is, do you view constructive criticism as proof of your underqualification? So very similar to the last one, but again, if you're taking that constructive feedback and instead of using it as the chance to grow, using it as a way to tear yourself down, that's another sign that you probably have imposter syndrome. So if you felt any of those ways, congratulations, you're in good company. You probably are facing imposter syndrome just like me and many, many other people, but that's okay, because we're going to address it and figure out how to regain our voices and move on from that feeling. So the first important part to doing so is understanding what exactly imposter syndrome is when we internalize it based on what it is in reality. So on the left on this slide, you'll see what your perception of reality is when you're facing imposter syndrome. So you have this really large circle of what you think that other people know, and then this tiny little circle of what you think you know. And we can see that we perceive that other people know all of this great knowledge, and we just know this very tiny subset of knowledge that everyone else also knows, so it's not relevant. In reality, as you see on the right, they're actually two very separate but equal-sized circles with a little bit of overlap, but not too much. So we see that what we know matches what other people know, but they're two very different subsets. So an example that I always like to use to poke some fun at myself is that what I know very well is reality TV shows. I watch a lot of reality TV with my mom, something that we love to do. Other people might not know that much about reality TV, but they might say know a lot about history or something like that. We have two different knowledge bases. They don't really overlap, but they can benefit each other in some way. And that's what the entire idea of imposter syndrome is. We need to change from seeing what's on the left to seeing what's on the right. And that's how we can start to shift inside of ourselves to understanding that the knowledge that we have is very, very valuable to share with other people. And that's how we need to leverage our voice in order to share that with other people. So how can we shift to believing the reality that we saw on the right instead of seeing the perception that we saw on the left? We can do this by recognizing and embracing our strengths. As humans, we so often ignore strength in favor of weakness because we find it difficult to quote unquote brag about ourselves, when in fact, sharing our strengths with the world is not bragging, but instead helping other people. So we need to work on how we can identify strengths in a positive way and share them with the people around us without feeling like we are somehow diminishing other people or talking about ourselves too much or whatever our fears may be. Gallup has introduced an idea, and Gallup is a company that does a lot of polls and studies. They introduced this idea of Clifton strengths, which are a way that we can explain our talent DNA. So it's basically a personality test that you take. It asks you questions about your working style and different things like that, and then ranks 34 different strengths that tell you basically what you are great at and what you may need to work a little bit more on. It doesn't characterize anything as weaknesses, which I really like because I don't believe that we have any weaknesses. We just have areas that we need to improve on. And it's a really great tool to help you understand kind of where you fit into a workplace and what you can contribute to other people. So in the nature of celebrating our strengths, I wanted to go through and show you what the different strengths are that are part of this quiz and share my own with all of you. And while I'm doing this, I want you to look at the words on the screen and try and pick out a couple that you think would be your strengths. And obviously it's easier if you take the test because it gives you more description on what they are. But for some of them, you can figure out enough from just seeing the word to know that you would associate with that strength. So my first strength is empathy. I take a lot of pride in being able to relate to other people and understand what they're going through and help them through it. I tend to be a very supportive friend and family member, so that's something that I'm very proud of, and I can help other people who I work with understand empathy and relate to each other, especially during this virtual time. My second is achiever, which goes along with the imposter syndrome, the high achiever personality, but I like to take leadership over things, and I like to strive towards goals and strive towards always bettering myself and the people around me. My third is command, and this again is tied to leadership and taking control of situations and helping lead people to the best solution. My fourth is an includer. I always like to look for people who may be feeling left out and do my best to make them feel part of a group. This is particularly important at work because I try to make sure that my team is always feeling very cohesive and everyone is feeling heard. Like we said before, I don't want anyone to feel like they're being ignored or misheard in meetings. So that's very important to me. And then my last one is a relator. This kind of goes along with empathy, but I really like to relate to other people. And I always like to get to know new people and understand what they're going through and help people through different situations. So again, if you found any in this list that you think relate to you, those are your strengths, and those are the things that you should really take control of and share with the world, because you're going to be able to help people in so many ways through those. Now, on the other side of things, I want to share what my weaknesses are on this scale. Again, they're not necessarily weaknesses, more so areas for improvement, but it's also important that we can recognize what we may not be the best in so that we can ask for help from other people and learn from the strengths of those people around us. So my first weakness or area for improvement is focus. I love to multitask. I'm constantly multitasking. And so focus is an area that I could probably work on a bit, because it's hard for me to stay dialed into exactly one path for work or one thing at any given moment. I feel like my mind is always in a million places. So this is definitely something that other people could help me with. My second is adaptability. I often get stuck in my ways, for lack of a better word, and I don't like to change course once I'm working towards something, even if I know that changing course is the best solution. So it's hard for me to say, if I was working on something for a couple of weeks, acknowledge that the way I was doing it is no longer the best way and switch to something different, because it's difficult for me to acknowledge that those 2 weeks might have been lost time that I was spending on something. So this is another area where people could help me to grow. The next is discipline, which goes along with focus. But I, again, just struggle to stay on track with one thing at any given time. I often like to be trying to get multiple things done at once, and this can affect my discipline for any one of those given tasks. The next is significance, and this is basically understanding a full life cycle of an idea or a project. I really like to think into the future and how we can make things better in the future without necessarily always taking the time needed to reflect on the past or the present. So understanding that full lifetime of any idea is something that I'm working on. And then the last is context. And a lot of these are similar. So context is similar to significance, but more relates to the past specifically. It's just when you struggle to look back and understand why something needs to be done, and instead you just focus on the future of how you can make something better. So all of these are ways that I really look to other people to build me up and share their voice with me so that I can learn from the strengths of others in order to improve my areas of improvement myself. So hopefully you were able to identify some in here for both your strengths and your areas of improvement, because that will help you build and shape your own voice. So we've talked about voice a lot, but let's dig a little bit more into how we can each find what it is specifically for ourselves. So in my opinion, our voices are our greatest self-marketing tools. It's a little bit weird to think of this idea of self-marketing because we're not a brand exactly, we're a person. So we don't need to be marketing ourselves to the world, but we do need to be marketing ourselves to the people around us. And that's not in a way that's meant for us to come across as insincere, but instead to make sure that other people's perception of us is the perception that we want them to have for us. And the only way that we can really convey that in the way that we want is by using our voice and by speaking up and sharing those strengths and acknowledging our areas for improvement so that other people understand what we believe about ourselves. So we need to figure out what is our personal brands. A personal brand, defined as an equation, is our internal attributes plus our self-perception plus our external perception. And this makes up who we are as a person, both internally and externally to the world. So let's go through each of these individually so we fully understand what they are. Internal attributes are the parts of us that we know are true, but may not always be visible to other people. These can be things like our values. They can be things like our strengths or our areas for improvement if we're not sharing those with the world. They can be just normal thoughts and feelings we have on a day-to-day basis. They're the parts of us that comprise who we are and that we know all the time, but that aren't on display for the rest of the world. Then we have this idea of self-perception, and this is how we think other people view us and how we want other people to view us. So for example, my self-perception is that I am a very supportive person who is outgoing and optimistic and always there for the people around her. That's how I hope people see me. That's how I see myself. But for the third part, external perception, if other people don't see me that way, then it doesn't really mean much. So external perception is the big key factor here, and that's how other people perceive us. So if other people think of me as supportive, optimistic, all of those things, then my personal brand is in alignment across the three areas. However, if people for some reason thought that I was unfriendly or negative or the contradictory of my self-perception, then there's a misalignment in my personal brand, and I need to address that and figure out how I can focus my voice into making sure that my brand is what I expect it to be and what I want it to be. So before we go into how we can build this personal brand, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about perception because I've said it a lot. So there's this idea of a Johari window, and it helps us understand our relationship with ourselves and others. So this is what it looks like. We have 4 different quadrants here. We're going to start with the one in the top left called the arena. So the arena is, as we can see, known to others and known to ourselves. So this is the part of us that is visible to the world. There are no secrets here. Everyone knows it. I know it. You all know it. So for example, part of my arena would be that I have brown hair. That's not really an arguable fact. I know I have brown hair. You all know I have brown hair. So that's part of my arena. It's known to all of us. If we move one spot to the right, we see our blind spot. This is something that's known to others, but not known to ourselves. So for example, it's kind of hard to give an example of this because it's something that you would all know and that I wouldn't know. But if people did think that I was really unfriendly for some reason, and I thought that I was very friendly, that would be a blind spot to me because you all have this perception that I'm a very mean person, but I have a perception that I'm a nice person. So that's an area that I need to be cognizant of and make sure that I'm focusing on figuring out what those blind spots are in order to align my brand. If we move down, we see our unknown self. This is the area that's not known to others and it's not known to ourselves. There will be a lot of things in our unknown self block today that we'll figure out years from now, or that someone else will figure out years from now and can move into all of these other boxes. But at this exact moment in time, there are parts of us that are buried somewhere in our subconscious and we don't know. Can't really give an example of this because, again, I don't know what it is yet, but if you ask in a few years, hopefully I'll have a few for you. And then if we move one to the left, we see our hidden self. These are things that are known to ourselves, but not known to others. So if there are parts of ourselves that we're scared to share, or parts of ourselves that we like to keep to ourselves and are quote unquote secrets to us, they would go in our hidden self box. And all of these together make up our perception for our self-perception and our external perception. And the 2 areas we need to be most aware of are our blind spots and our hidden self. Again, blind spot, we need to make sure that if other people see us differently, we're continuing to align ourselves with what they're seeing. And then for our hidden self, we need to make sure that we're not hiding anything that's very important to who we are. For example, if we're hiding some of our core values, that's a concern because we want those values to be part of our personal brand and be perceived by other people. So we want to make sure that they're not being hidden. So now that we know a little bit about perception, we're going to go through a 7-step process to help define what our personal brand is. And this is something that I have done before. So after each step, I'm going to show you an example of how I tackled this step for myself, and you can follow along and do it for your own brand if you would like to. So the first step is to identify what your non-negotiables are. What I mean by this is, what are the things that make you you? What are the things that are at the core of who you are as a person and are things that you will never change, you will never give up for anyone else, and will always be important to you? So for me, I defined 4 values that make me who I am and are things that are super important to me and how I choose to live my life. The first is compassion. That goes along with some of my strengths like empathy and inclusion. I want to be compassionate towards other people, regardless of if they're my friends, my family, or people I've just met. I want to make sure that people always feel like I'm supportive of them and hear them and are there to support them in any way that they need. The next is inclusion. I strive to make sure that people always feel included, that I'm not making anyone feel like they're not a part of a group, and I'm always striving to make sure that the people on teams that I work with feel just as heard as they should. The next one is love. This goes along with my relationship with family and friends. I would do anything for those people in a heartbeat. They're at the root of who I am as a person, and they're all extremely important to me, and they know that. So that's something that's very, very important. And then the last is work ethic. I am a high achiever. I really care about my career, and I care about making sure that I'm always putting my full self into whatever work I'm doing. So that's, again, at the core of who I am. So these 4 things comprise what are most important to me and what the things are that I will never change about myself, no matter what anyone else perceives or tells me. Once you have your non-negotiables, you need to identify what your strengths are. And we already kind of did this by highlighting what those 5 strengths were on the word chart before. I just listed them again here. I was achiever, commander, empathy, includer, and relator. If you followed along with that, your strengths would be here. But even if you don't take a quiz like that, I'm sure you can all identify strengths within yourself that you just know because you know yourself better than anyone else and you know what you're really great at. So take a chance to write those down. The next step is to identify what your improvement areas are. So again, we did that with the word chart. Mine were adaptability, context, discipline, focus, and significance. If you followed along with that, you can write them down here. But again, you probably know what your areas for improvement are without taking the quiz. For example, I know that patience is one of my areas of improvement, and it wasn't on that list of 34 strengths, probably because it's not a strength for anyone. But if you know something like patience is a problem for yourself, this could be an area of improvement that you jot down here. The next step is to basically take all of those things that you just wrote down, your strengths, areas of improvement, and what makes you you, and turn them into what is known as a personal statement. And this is basically like a mission statement would be for a company, where they're stating what they're striving for, what their goals are as a company, and what they'll continually work towards, and what they bring to the table. And this is us trying to convince other people that our self-perception is reality and that they should see us this way. So my personal statement is, I am a fiercely passionate leader dedicated to supporting and bettering the lives of those around me. So this touches on my root of who I am. I'm talking about being a leader. That goes along with my work ethic. I'm talking about being dedicated to supporting and bettering those around me. That goes along with love, inclusion. So all of those things are really encapsulated in this one statement. So I want to take a minute just to give you all a chance to jot down some ideas for a personal brand statement for yourself. I have a timer set, so I'll come back after a minute. I know it's not a ton of time, but just get some ideas down so that you can finish it later. You don't have to share it with anyone, but take a chance to do that now, and I'll be back with you soon.
So Kelsie, we should write down some personal statement to gather our strengths and weaknesses, or only our strengths together?
You can focus on only strengths, or you can bring them both together if you think that areas of improvement are something at the core of what you want other people to see. So if, for example, if patience was something that I really wanted to work on and it was an area of improvement for me, I could have included that in here by saying, I'm a fiercely passionate leader dedicated to supporting and bettering the lives of those around me while exhibiting patience, or something like that. Okay. I chose not to include it in mine, but you absolutely can if it's something that's really important for you to continue bettering in your own life and you want it to be part of that statement.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for asking, though. Good clarification. Okay, it's been about a minute, so I'm going to keep going for the sake of time so we can get through everything and have time for questions, but I know that's not enough time to write a full one. Please do revisit it later because I wrote this probably 4 years ago now, and it's still true today, and it's still what I'm trying to convey to the world. So just as weird as it may feel to write this down, going through the exercise can really help you have something to base how you live your life on and take it into conveying your voice and take it into the workplace, into your personal relationships, and it is very helpful. So thank you for going through that exercise with me. Once you have your personal brand statement, we're going to move on to step 5, which is when we begin to actually use our voice outwardly. So steps 1 through 4 are really on finding what our voice is within ourselves. But now we're moving on from that embracing phase into the leveraging and building phase. So in order to leverage our strengths, we need to share them with other people around us. The way we can do this is by understanding how those areas for us can really better the lives of others. So an example for me, focusing on my strength of inclusion, would be asking someone for their thoughts in a meeting forum when they've been soft-spoken. So I am very good at making other people feel part of a group. So if I notice that someone's area for improvement may be speaking up, or that someone else is struggling to find their voice and share it with the world, I can use that inclusion side of me to ask them directly for their thoughts or make them feel comfortable in that group in order to speak their mind. And that can really help someone else with an area of improvement while showcasing one of my strengths and allowing my voice to better the lives of the people around me. On the other side of that, we need to share our improvement areas in order to help ourselves. And that's probably the toughest part of sharing our voice, is acknowledging when we're not perfect or the things that we may need help with. But in order to make those areas of improvement stronger and help turn them into strengths eventually, we need to make sure that we're sharing this with the world that, hey, I'm not necessarily great at focus, for example. Could you give me some tips on how you stay so productive and focused on one thing throughout the day so that I can better myself? So another example for one of mine is context, which is the idea of not looking back into the past before moving into the future. And for this, if I were working on a project, I could ask a client to describe their need for the product before I started work on it. And that would give me some context into what the past makeup of that project was, so that before I just jump to the future and how I can make it better, I am taking the time to focus in the past and learn from what has been spoken about before, maybe what mistakes happened before, and make sure that I have that full picture before moving forward. And then finally, we need to make sure that we are always maintaining a brand for ourselves. So it's awesome if you have that personal statement, because this can really be at the root of maintaining our brand. We can always make sure that we're revisiting that idea and making sure that we still feel that it's true for ourselves, and modifying it as needed is completely okay, because we all change over time, and that's perfectly acceptable. But some other ways we can make sure that we maintain this brand and constantly are making sure that our voice is heard is by checking our inward and outward perception. So again, we need to make sure that we're always aligning that. So I always want to check with myself, and I do this a lot, to make sure that I am acting in a way that matches what I want other people to think of me. And I'm very good at catching things in myself now. I wasn't when I first started this whole idea of using my voice in personal branding, but I'm pretty quick to realize, oh, that action that I took does not align with what I want other people to see me as. And if I notice that, I will very quickly be able to realign myself and make amends for whatever that action was that I don't think aligned with myself, or make sure that moving forward I don't do that. And then I also check my outward perception, and that's kind of awkward and another really great chance to use our voices, because it means that we have to ask other people, hey, do you think that I am optimistic, inclusive, friendly, whatever it may be? That can be very awkward because you're scared of hearing the answer no. But if you don't ask those questions, you will never know if that alignment exists. So it is really important that we feel comfortable in asking for feedback and understanding that it's not negative, it's just constructive. The next step we can take is to highlight our uniqueness in whatever group we may be in. So we are all going to have very different strengths. None of us will have probably the exact same ranking of our 34 strengths in order. So we need to recognize with the people around us and in our lives what strengths do we have that they may not necessarily have that we can bring to the table? And then we need to make sure that we're leveraging those strengths in order to help others through our voice. The next is to increase our visibility. And this can go along with those strengths again. If we find, for example, on the team that I work on at Google, I am the person who has the strength for building the team and pulling people together. So I have increased my visibility within that team by organizing a lot of team building and team fun events to make sure that we're all getting to know each other. And everyone very much appreciates that for me. And they now expect that of me because that's kind of the role that I took on in the team. So look at your strengths, look at the gap that may exist in a team that you're on, and figure out how you can use that strength in order to bridge that gap for other people. The next is to revisit your non-negotiables all the time. Look to that list of things that you made. Make sure that you're still living your life according to that list. In this case, it's not something that you should change because, again, they're your non-negotiables. They're things you said you never wanted to change about yourself. So if you feel like you're no longer living according to those, you may want to look at what's changed and see how you can make sure you're still prioritizing the things that were most important to you. And then the last is to project perception that you want other people to see. This can be by sharing your strengths with others, by asking for help with your areas of improvement, or just by taking a chance and speaking up more in meetings, or making sure that people are really hearing your voice when you use it. Because your perception that you think of yourself can make all the difference in what other people think of you, but only if you're sharing it through using your voice. So going back to this picture that I shared at the beginning, like I said, I did not have my voice at this point. I had not gone through any of these exercises to figure out what it was, and I was very scared 18-year-old who didn't know what she was getting herself into. But flashing forward 5 years, this is me, my first day working at Google full-time. Wasn't actually in the office because of COVID, but I still took a picture outside of it. And I am much more confident. I've found my voice. I know when I need to speak up, and I know how to share my strengths with other people. And I also know how to speak up and ask for help and work on those areas of improvement by absorbing other people's voices as well. So, moral of this whole talk is that the world needs to hear your voice. It's very, very important, not only for yourself, but for the people around you. And so it's time to share it with the world in whatever way you feel comfortable. But even just taking that initial step can really make all the difference. So thank you so much for all being here with me today. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them in the time that we have left. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you so much. It was really amazing. I wrote down many things.
I'm so glad you did it.
In fact, I like the way that we have to know our strengths, we have to know our weaknesses, and we have to improve these weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So I have a personal question.
Yeah, go
so
for it.
Is there, in fact, there some questions, not one question, okay? So, in fact, the first one is there a question or is there a quote or is there something that you always tell yourself in the morning when you're going to work with your family, just to know how you should do this or how you should know your weaknesses or your strength?
Yeah.
Is it something that you use?
Yeah. So I actually have kind of a practice that I do with this, I guess I would call it. So whenever, for example, I said like sometimes when I wake up and I'm going to work, I question, am I going to be discovered today as like not belonging or people realizing I'm a fraud or something? Whenever I feel that way, I always keep a document at work of accomplishments that I've made. I do this in my personal life too. When I do something significant that helps other people, or I just have a personal goal that I have hit, I'll write it down in a journal. I like to write a lot, so I journal everything. And that really helps me because whenever I feel those questioning thoughts come in my mind, I'll look at my journal and just look at a few of the positive things that I've accomplished, and it helps to reset me and remind me that you may be feeling like this today, but just last week you organized an event that helped bring 30 people together or whatever it may be, and that can help me see that my personal brand is still on track and that I'm still striving and reaching the goals that I'm really always focusing on. So even though it feels weird, and I kind of hate doing it because no one likes to brag about themselves or feel like, they're acknowledging their successes too much, I really encourage people to do something like that because having a record of those thoughts can be extremely valuable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have 2 more questions. So
Okay,
while knowing that sharing and speaking about imposter syndrome is helpful, where do you find the strength to be so vulnerable with others? How can you overcome that fear or shame?
That's a great question. Also, give 1 second before I answer this. I just want to plug in my laptop because I think it might die in a minute and I don't want that to happen.
Okay, okay, take your time. So, اللي تفرجوا في اللايف أي حد فيكم عنده question, n'hésitez pas. Vous pouvez poser la question وأسألونا and Kelsie will answer. So if you have any question, please ask.
Okay, back to the question I was asked. Fantastic question, and I definitely had a really hard time being vulnerable with people when I first thought of all these ideas. And I did have a lot of fear and shame in admitting that I had imposter syndrome. Unfortunately, I think one of the best ways to overcome that, for me at least, was by other people being vulnerable first. I think that was kind of the catalyst in me feeling like I could be vulnerable myself. So hopefully this talk helped a little bit in that. But the thing that really helped me was my first internship. I was talking to my manager who had been with the company for 10 years. And I was, without saying the words imposter syndrome, trying to just share some of the feelings that I had with him to make him aware of what I was going through. So basically expressing that sometimes I felt like I didn't belong in the company because I might not have had, for example, the same interests as all the people on my team, or I came from a state university instead of one of the Ivy Leagues, or whatever it may be. And just sharing that with him, he was able to recognize that I was facing imposter syndrome, and having him say those words and recognize them to me, and then sharing that he had felt the same way, really helped me to feel like I could be vulnerable and share that with other people. So I think a lot of times it can take someone else validating those feelings for you to be able to move forward and share your own experience with others and overcome that feeling of fear, because knowing that other people go through it makes it feel a lot less scary, at least for me. So hopefully me sharing it with you can help alleviate some of that. But I know it's a journey and a process, and it's not something that can go away immediately. It takes time.
Yeah, it takes time. Okay, so the third question is, how can you give someone constructive criticism without triggering their imposter syndrome?
That's a great question too. So I think that the way that I've kind of approached this when I've had to give constructive criticism to people who I knew had imposter syndrome, and the first part of this is I just honestly assume that everyone is facing imposter syndrome, even if they're not, because it's safer to assume that than to say something that could potentially trigger it by just assuming they don't have it. So I always err on the side of caution here. But what I try to do in my approach is start by basically that 2-part process that I mentioned before: celebrate their strength and then acknowledge the areas for improvement. So if I need to give criticism for something that's constructive, I would start by acknowledging an area that they've done really great in, and potentially give an area where I think they could use that strength to fill in a gap on the team or whatever it may be, to kind of build that confidence in themselves and show that, you are recognizing that they're doing something really well. And then move into the constructive criticism part, where you can say, at the same token, I've noticed that you might be struggling in this particular area. And I think that, taking this step to help with that would be really beneficial for the team as a whole. And phrase it as not like you're doing something badly, but instead you've noticed that they might be struggling in that particular area and you want to help them. So again, it all ties back to making sure that you're celebrating people's successes at the same time that you're helping them to better themselves in a certain way. And as long as you acknowledge that success or that accomplishment or whatever it is, it will make them feel much better and not feel as much of an attack on them.
Okay, thank you so much. So anyone else, if you have another question? So, okay, there is another question. So as a manager or employer, is there a way to help someone who has imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think the biggest way that a manager or an employer can help is to open a dialogue about it. A lot of times it's kind of this thing that's not talked about that much, and that's where people can really feel like they're alone in it. So until, like I said, my manager directly brought it up to me, I felt like I was on an island by myself of imposter syndrome and no one else was dealing with it. So if you have even just a session like this where you talk about imposter syndrome or share that you experienced it once yourself when you were early in your career, whatever it may be, or have someone come in who went through it and just speak the words imposter syndrome, because a lot of times they're not said in the workplace, that will get people talking about it and sharing amongst the team. And you might learn that everyone is facing it on the team where no one else had talked about it before. So having sessions surrounding it is very important, or even in one-on-one meetings, just talking about what imposter syndrome is and sharing your own experience with it can really go a long way. Once you've kind of opened that dialogue, people will start feeling more comfortable sharing it. And that's when, if people are maybe expressing to you that they are dealing with a lot of imposter syndrome, you can point them to resources within your company or employer, if they exist, to provide someone to talk to about it or to provide ways that they can work through it. For example, you could say, give them the exercise to write down their strengths or create their strengths statement or whatever it may be. But just taking that first step to acknowledge that it exists and validate the feelings and that they're not alone in it is probably the best way that you can just create a culture of safety surrounding the idea.
Okay, that's perfect. So you suggest that it can be one-to-one conversation, something like between the manager and the employee, or it can be all the group?
Yeah, it can be both. I would say starting with having it as a conversation with the whole group is a good way to make everyone feel comfortable in sharing that in a one-on-one setting. So if you bring it up as the whole group, then everyone knows that you're, as a manager, comfortable in talking about it. So then in the one-on-one meetings, people might feel more comfortable bringing it to the attention of their manager, or the manager can directly ask everyone in the one-on-one meetings, like, hey, after that talk, did any of that resonate with you? How are you feeling after that? And it might make people just feel a little bit more safe in sharing that. Whereas if the manager or employer doesn't bring it up, a lot of times individual contributors won't feel as safe or comfortable in sharing that.
Okay. In fact, I have another question. So I think there is a thin difference between arrogance and talking about strengths. So how can I be strong but not rude or arrogant?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I struggle with a lot because we never want to feel like we're being arrogant.
Yeah.
The way that I approach it is I never will directly say, like, this is a strength of mine, because that feels arrogant to me. I don't want to directly, like, state that I'm very good at something. I'll instead take the action to prove what those strengths are. So, for example, with the team building that I mentioned, I didn't approach that by saying, hey, I'm good at including people and I'm really great at building teams, so I'm going to create this event. I just took the initiative and set up an event and ran it, and it went good. And then everyone just knew that a strength of mine was organizing events like that and making people feel included. So I never had to say it, but by taking the action, I proved it to other people without ever having to state the words, I'm really good at whatever it may be. So I think that's the key in not having arrogance, is by not saying what you were good at, but instead showing what you're good at and convincing other people and making their perception to be that you are very good at that thing.
Okay, so we will be in the arena zone, something that we know about ourselves, and they will know. Okay. So I think there is another question. Okay, is there a method to get rid of that weird, embarrassed feeling that comes with talking about your strengths, achievements? Because it's always feel like bragging. It's not like you're talking, it's like something like you're showing off.
Yeah, very much agree with that too. These are all great questions. So I think the first step into getting rid of that feeling is to feel comfortable in acknowledging what the strengths are for yourself. For a long time, I didn't even feel comfortable like acknowledging what my own strengths are. And even when people would say, oh, you're really good at this thing, like I would feel very weird about that and not want to admit it. So that came, for me at least, with the whole idea of journaling and writing those accomplishments down. That was a very personal thing for me where no one else could see it. So I didn't feel like I was bragging to anyone but myself. And for a while, it felt like I was bragging to myself, and that was weird for me. But after time, I got more comfortable with that idea of recognizing my achievements. And by over time, it probably took me a year to feel very comfortable in recognizing that. But once I felt that comfort with myself, that's when I was able to start taking those actions externally to showcase my strengths. And again, I still don't feel comfortable telling other people directly, oh, I'm really great at this thing, or I achieved this event that I put on, or whatever it may be. But I do at least feel comfortable in knowing the strengths within myself and being able to turn those into concrete actions for other people. So I think just trying in whatever way works for you, could be journaling, doesn't have to be, could even just be taking that personality test that I mentioned and having the list of it to look at, but understanding what those strengths are internally and gaining comfort with that, and just reminding yourself, this is not bragging, this is something that I'm really great at, and then turning that into actionable items is the best way that I've found to not feel like bragging. But also just know that you are not bragging. You're just awesome at certain things, and you should share those with the world because you're going to make an impact on other people's lives. I know that's hard to internalize, but it's true.
Sharing is caring.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelsie. Really, it was amazing. It was so motivational talk. For me, I wrote down many things that I think I'll starting today.
Awesome.
So if there is another question, okay. So I think this is it. Thank you again, Kelsie. Thank you to everyone who is watching with us. This is the first talk of our first day to celebrate International Women's Day, Monastir, Beja, and Carthage. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll be waiting for you to join us until the next session. See you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.